Well, thank you again for joining us today. And welcome to A Solution Without a Problem, Where to Start Your AI Journey. And I really appreciate you all coming to the second in the series of AI for Smart People. And this series, if you didn't get a chance to join us on the last one, is really focused, one, on the legal industry, and two, on bringing a real practical view to this whole AI thing that we've been thrown into against our will, and really kind of saying, doesn't matter about the product, doesn't matter about what you're up to. Let's break this down. Let's look at it in practical matters, and let's make sure that we all know what we're doing. And so last week's session, we talked a little bit about kind of foundational knowledge, what are LLMs? What do you need to be thinking about with ChatGPT? What are tokens? What's reinforcement learning? All those kinds of fun things that are very helpful in kind of understanding what to do. And in this session, we are going to talk about kind of, what do we do now? Okay, we have the basics. What now? How do we get started? And so we have a great guest, Dr. Blindenbach here, and we'll jump in just one moment. But before we get started, wanted to tell you a little bit about the other events in the series. So there's 4 more sessions scheduled. So we have sessions upcoming on, next session is with Shauna Huffman from Guardrail Technologies, and she's going to talk to us kind of about the next place we go, right? How do we put guardrails in place? What kind of governance do we need to be thinking about, and what she's seeing in other industries around this? Then we're going to talk with Kat Casey and talk about what we kind of look back at what we've been doing in discovery with AI, because this isn't new in discovery. We've been using it. And so what have we been doing and where are we going next? And as you know, Reveal, where she's at, is kind of leading the way in a lot of ways there. Then we're going to talk about recruiting and kind of where the heck we get the people for this, right? None of us woke up the day after Casetext made their announcement about CoCounsel and became experts in AI. So where do we get the people? How do we build the teams that we need? And then we'll close out the series, unless the last one that I'm trying to put together comes together, which might be a holiday event right before Thanksgiving, but I digress. The last one in the series will be with some real practical tools that are super low risk that you can take a look at today and see how they fit in. So we'll talk with some founders of these new tools about how they decided to tackle the problem safely and confidently, and how you might do the same thing with either those tools or other similar tools. And so with that, just a quick introduction of myself. I'm Cheryl Wilson-Griffin, the CEO of Legal Tech Consultants. We are really focused on bringing together all the elements of the ecosystem. So we work with corporate legal, we work with law firms, and we work with legal tech companies, because none of us exist without each other. We all kind of interplay. And so it's really important that we share information, that we know what each other wants, what each other needs, and that we all kind of are working with the same set of knowledge. And so with that, I'm going to pull up our little sexy slide deck and jump right in. All right, let me move this over here. This is like really crushing it today. All right, share screensies. Okay, so I'll put that over there for now. Oh, actually, I don't need the slide quite yet. Brilliant. All right. Let's start with the easy stuff. How about that? So the background for this session was kind of an interesting one. So Flora and I have kind of tangentially known each other for, I don't know, since the pandemic, I guess, as we met online, like many of us. And we had a chance to get chatting a bit more at ILTACon. Flora, as Gordon pointed out and Joy pointed out, had a great booth in the Startup Alley. And I would spend pretty much all my time hanging out in the Startup Alley, because as it turns out, that's where all the cool kids are. If you want to hang out with the cool kids, go to Startup Alley. That's my hot tip for you. So we spent a lot of time hanging out in the Startup Alley and got to hanging around talking with Flora and looking at her booth and kind of saying, you know, Flora, I guess I don't totally understand what's going on. And she had her dissertation there, and I was like, tell me more, tell me more about what's going on. And so that's kind of where this came from. And it turned out that we had a lot in common. We shared a lot of the same views. And she's actually done some really cool in-depth research on how to do innovation right. And she's working with law firms today, right now, on how to approach AI in a very structured and logical and practical way and having great results with it. And so I said, well, you gotta come talk to our people and tell them about what you're doing and how they might do it. And so what you're going to hear today, hopefully, is kind of some of the research that the findings that Flora's dug up for us, and some of it is like really different than what we've done in the past, the more traditional approach that we've taken. And some of it maybe, sounds like, oh, yeah, that makes sense, which, and frankly, all the best ideas do make sense once you think about them, right? And so, so we'll kind of walk you through a super mini tiny section of what the kinds of things she does in her, I think it's 12-week workshop. So we'll chat through that. So let's jump in. So Flora, as with many of us on the call, you found your way into legal technology via, let's call it a non-traditional path. So can you talk with us a little bit about, where you started out and how you got here?
I certainly can. I think I'm the least traditional of everyone here because I'm a chemical engineer by training. And there it's interesting because there a lot of the automation started to happen like in the 1990s. So a lot of the discussions around training and AI were right when I came out of college and where we were equipped with all the tools, while at most engineering firms, they were still doing it manually. My goal was to make the planet greener, so always brought innovative ideas forward, and surprise, surprise, nothing came out of it.
So you were trying to innovate to save the world, essentially, as a chemical engineer, and it didn't work. And so you said, well, there's got to be a better way. And it sounds like you went back to school.
I went back to school because I was reading about the innovation literature, and if anyone has done that, it's about collaborating with clients, collaborating with suppliers. Well, that's what an engineering firm does on a weekly basis. They also can put together projects, billion-dollar projects at the day accurate. So all that I was reading did not make sense. So I went to the Rotterdam School of Management to do my PhD, and it started with engineering firms. And over the years, I have shifted my interest because I saw parallels. Privately, I've moved 3 times across the ocean during this career. One advantage of moving often is you always get new opportunities. So I also had the opportunity to look into healthcare and since 2008 also into the legal space. And I found just many, many parallels where you have organizations that provide services, work with super smart people, and the state-of-the-art knowledge is amongst the busiest providers. So if you want to advance the firm, how do you get these super busy professionals along? So that's basically what we have tried to solve with the firm that I started organizing for innovation.
Love that. Okay, cool. So then let's jump in and start talking a little bit about kind of what you found in your research. And let me share my screen again. Boop, boop, boop. Oh, let me start with the cool quote that you pulled out, which I love. Plus I love pictures of Albert Einstein. Who doesn't, right? So the idea kind of being, if you have an hour to think about, to spend on a problem, spend 55 minutes thinking about the problem and only 5 on the solution. Can you talk a little bit about why that's the right approach?
Well, in innovation literature, if you want to get some buzzword, we call that the fuzzy front end. But that's in the beginning, everything is fluid and flexible. Choices are choices on paper. So you have a lot of flexibility and you can move things easily around. The moment you put your stake in the ground and you start working towards a solution, there's no flexibility anymore. What more, like problems always stay the same, but solutions can change. So that's why it's so important to really understand the problem you're working on, because that's rock solid. That won't, whatever you do, that problem will always remain there and exist. And so if you're looking for stability in your innovation project, the problem won't change. So
that's such a really great point. It's funny. I was on a call just before this with the client where we're looking to replace, let's call it an antiquated law firm CRM. I won't name it, but it's terrible. And so the BD, the gentleman who runs BD said, great, what are we going to replace it with? And I was like, woo, jumping ahead. We're still figuring out, we're just still defining the problem. We need to understand what all the available solutions are because they've changed so much, right? We have AI now, we have all these things. The solutions change, the problem stays the same, right?
Well, and also like, what is the problem? Is it too expensive? Is it too clumsy? Is the user face not easy enough? Yeah. So, what
Exactly.
problem are you solving for, so that you know that you select a better next solution?
Exactly. All right, so let's dig into more of your research. Let's click. Please, mouse, work with me. There we go. So let's talk about your research into innovation. Talk
So
me
talk,
through.
yeah. So talking with many law firms, we've seen that adoption is the biggest hurdle. I've yet to find a firm where they don't have a lack of ideas. So the ideas are there. The ambitions are there to make changes. I'm a strong believer that people love to change. I may be a little different there, but hey, if you give someone a cell phone, those things are not intuitively, they will use it if the previous version was a pocket phone or even a handheld phone. So I digress.
I
But
totally
usually
agree with you on
adoption.
that, though. I totally agree with you. I don't think people hate change as much as they do. They just hate change. It isn't that great.
Yeah.
Yep.
So adoption is often, and I'm just adoption is the biggest hurdle. And then what we have seen is that if you look at solutions that are easily to adopt, they have a few things in common. They have a very crystal clear business needs. They often are point solutions, which mean like they solve one very particular problem. And that often means that you have motivated participants, because if you solve someone's problems, they're in for the game.
Yeah, I mean, that's the whole thing, right? And that's where that's the adoption point, right? So if people aren't motivated to participate, you have no adoption. You have no chance of adoption.
No, you need to solve a pressing problem and a painful problem. Nice to have. We are all too busy for that. So it really needs to, because that's another thing. Like an innovation project takes time to develop and to implement. So there needs to be enough momentum and drive to get over that hump of, in chemical engineering terms, activation energy. But it takes some effort to get to those benefits. So if people see what the benefits will be before and after, they won't adopt. So that's why that clear business needs is of critical importance.
And so logically, as we think about innovation, one of the places your research has a big impact is in helping firms find success with this whole new artificial intelligence thing. So can you tell us a little bit about what you're working on, the kind of workshop thing that you're working on, and helping them figure out kind of where to start, the de-risking, that whole thing?
Yeah, so it may help to give you here just a case study to kind of like show you how this works in practice. So one of our clients really struggled with getting their projects off the ground. It's a mid-sized firm. They set up an AI committee early in this year. Lots of enthusiasm. 7 people of the firm said, like, sign me up. I would love to participate. They had people from litigation, from the transaction side of the firm. They were all set and hang to go. So they started talking, researching, inviting some vendors. So slowly but surely, they became a little wiser. At the same time, tension started to build, because it was clear that everyone was going in all kinds of directions. They talked about the dangers, about the need of guardrails, and at the same time, there were also people that wanted to change the world. They wanted to automate their billing. Others saw opportunities in predicting what judges would say. Like, the sky was the limit. But it all remained very abstract. So it was just a lot of talk. So in the meantime, they had also adopted, they moved to the cloud, which to a certain extent did not help and did help. It had been a really painful process. So everyone had that fresh in their minds. Management was asking every month, so what's up? What did the committee come with? And well, 6 months in, that became a really painful question, because at the beginning you said, oh, we're researching. Month 3, researching a little more, like 6 months, like, and they also saw like dwindle, like the 7 people, 2 or 3 would show up for the meeting. So that's when the head of the department decided to sign up for our program, our de-risk generative AI program. We then worked with them, after which, like in 2 weeks, we had a clearly defined project. We settled on data collection and a maintenance project for all the litigation matters to have a better forecast in costs and durations. So really downsized it to something very, very practical. Clearly, the transactional lawyers were not so happy with the choice because they were left out of the boat. At the same time, they realized that getting to a result was better than getting to nothing. And the other thing, they also realized as a group that by creating this database and finding a way to maintain it, this would be so foundational that whatever would come out of it, whether they would use generative AI or whatever tool, it would be successful no matter what, because currently no one could find all the information was dispersed in different ways. So that became the project. How can we build this one kind of like database and maintain it? Because creating a database is one thing, maintaining it is a totally different story. So that's now 8 weeks into the program. They're now building the business case. They're in conversation with vendors. But these conversations with vendors are also very different because instead of having these vendors present to them what they can do, they have very specific questions to the vendors, like this is what we want to do, this is the data we have, and this is what we struggle with. Can your solution do this? So that is much more fruitful and also much more specific about the cost that it takes. So that's some of the stuff that we do in this de-risk generative AI program. We just focus on helping firms create the business case. In other programs, we also help with the implementation. So we strive to get to concrete outcomes within 6 months. And we have helped from creating such databases, client portals, new service offerings, firm-wide learning systems, you name it. So we are pretty flexible, not just generative AI. And then supporting like single projects is one thing that we do, but we also help like COOs or others who are tasked to manage the innovation portfolio in their firm, but who put in a lot of effort, but still kind of like struggle to show the results. And that's what I would love to also in this webinar, kind of like how with a different approach, the approach that we'll be discussing today, how are you able to change things around?
Well, and it sounds like, I mean, even from that one case study, right? They spent 6 months not really getting anywhere. In 8 weeks, they have some very concrete plans. That's I can imagine that person is sleeping better at night, the person who's in charge of that project. I know I would be. So that's
their innovation, their managing partner was happy that suddenly 7 months in, like, hey, things are happening.
Right, things are happening. We have stories to tell. So we're going to share some of those great insights today. And so it's funny because, we have kind of, okay, our definition of what the most successful innovation initiatives center on, but generative AI is kind of the opposite of that, right?
Yeah, so what we were talking before in the previous slide, like these point solutions, if you think about generative AI and from an adoption perspective, it is kind of the opposite because it's very comprehensive. It can do everything. At the same time, it's very poorly defined. Yeah.
Could be anything, right? Yeah, anything and everything, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and then it comes with a lot of caveats, hallucinations, privacy concerns, uncertainty about the cost. So if you don't have a very, very clear business need, and that's one of the things we work on with firms, like in the business case, if you don't know that if this problem that you're solving is currently costing the firm $10,000, $100,000, or $1 million, you also don't know how much flexibility you have to spend to solve the problem, but also not how much willingness people are willing to give up. Because, hey, if a law firm can save, say, $1 million, then the IT department may be willing to relax a few rules with the authority of the managing partner. And of course, like it cannot be unsafe, but usually law firms are castles with 10 moats, so perhaps 9 moats could be good enough.
There's other ways to mitigate risk, though, right? And the risk can be defined differently depending on what the payoffs are, right?
Absolutely. So that's kind of the balance. That's and that's why it's so important to have that very clear, like what problem are you solving for the business?
Excellent. So let's start to pivot now. So here's the good news for everybody on the call today. We are all at the starting line together. There is no one that is like far away ahead of you. We're all together for now. But it's time to start. Now's the time to start. So hopefully you are all familiar with the Strategic Knowledge and Innovation Legal Leaders Skills.law group and event. It's in January every year. think it's done 3 or 4 years. It's in a virtual event. I encourage you to register. You can go to it at skills.law. And there's a survey. It's hosted by Simpson Thatcher, and I think I manage Oz, who you may know, who's the Chief Innovation Officer over there. He runs it. And they ask, when you sign up, they ask all the participants a series of questions. And this year they have a lot of questions around AI and large language models. And so just sharing with you this, if you go fill this out, if you go sign up, you'll get access to it as well. But the great news is, if you look at this big towering blue bar, those are all the people who've done absolutely nothing with AI. That's almost everyone who's replied to the survey. So that's the good news. So there's almost no one doing anything. And so we're at the point where we can say, great, where do we start? And so that's where Floor comes in. And so let's talk approach. How does the way that we approach innovation really need to change? And what are the approaches, and how do we kind of take it away?
Yeah, so here a little theory that hopefully doesn't become too theoretical. The traditional way, if you think about how the Googles and Amazons of this world innovate, it's very top down. Senior management, they have a vision. They also usually have products. So if you have like a car manufacturer, every 3 years you need a new car version, and every year you need a new widget or something just to keep production going. So that is driving innovation in many product firms. They approach innovation for that reason from a very systematic way. They have rigorous planning and control. They have a whole portfolio. They mitigate risk over this portfolio. So if you see their risk and uncertainty, I don't think it's the risk averse. It's really mitigating like high risk, low risk projects, and they just create a whole portfolio. So if you take that for an average firm, they have a lot of people working on that. That's their full-time job. And the state-of-the-art knowledge, they can do that because it is with the R&D department. Now, what we've seen in law firms, that's just not simply how it works for a host of reasons. First of all, the state-of-the-art knowledge is not in the R&D department. That's impossible if you have especially if you have a law firm with like 15 practice groups. That's where in those 15 practice groups, they have the state-of-the-art knowledge. So that's very difficult to represent in an innovation team.
And can we pause for just one moment? Because I think you hit on something really important here that we miss out on. When we think about the state-of-the-art knowledge, right, for practices, there's kind of 2 elements to it. Well, I'm suggesting there's 2 elements. So you tell me if I'm right or not. There's kind of the knowledge of the state-of-the-art for the practice, right, the practice of law. But then there's the state-of-the-art for the technology that goes along with that, right? So let's say you're transactional, like what's the state-of-the-art for the due diligence or for contracts or things like that? Is that accurate?
Yeah, and I think what you can say is the first never changed and still is not changing, right, because how you practice law, and I think where law firms really had to adjust, or lawyers in general, also in corporate counsel, is how you practice law has, of course, changed dramatically over the past, what would you say, 10, 15 years. So it used to be a manila folder. I don't think anyone can get any associate sign up for the firm if you're still carrying around manila folders. So that is, but how do you make those changes happen because when you can't afford a lot of overhead, because an Amazon can afford to literally 20% of their revenues goes into innovation. I wouldn't suggest any law firm to do that. Usually it used to be 0.1%, if not 0.01%. Now some are closer to like 1% of revenue spending on legal tech and innovation. But still, it's a relatively small number. And one of the reasons is the upside is much smaller. If Amazon figures out how to provide cloud services, that's $1 billion business. If a law firm figures out how to use iManage or how to generative AI, or even if they're very progressive and find that they can do online dispute resolutions with generative AI, I'm just tossing something out there, it won't be $1 billion business.
Right.
They have how many clients? A couple of hundred, perhaps 1,000. And so the the uptake that a law firm can have for M&A investment is just, it's in the order of millions, not billions. And that means that you need to be very diligent on the cost side because you just cannot spend that much on developing new solutions. And that's why you find in many services it's very vendor driven. Vendors do the innovations, but that does not mean that every firm still needs to use these solutions that vendor provide and create a unique version of that themselves. Otherwise, there is no competitive advantage.
Right. And so the way we want to move towards is a more opportunistic approach.
Absolutely. So that you can take like projects one by one. And that's what most law firms already do. So I just put more structure around that. They're not looking at an entire portfolio and say like, how are we going to invest? Some big firms absolutely do, but as any smaller mid-sized firms, they invest in one project at a time. They evaluate projects one at a time. And that's where, again, like we have built the systems around. So how, if you evaluate projects one at a time, how do you approach it from a risk perspective, from a resource allocation? And how do you make sure that if you don't have experts to execute these projects, but are relying on your IT group, your lawyers to run these projects, how do you make that happen?
Something, and maybe we just have a minute on this so we can keep on schedule, but one of the things that I noticed as I was kind of going through this, that's a difference, or that maybe is a mismatch. In my experience, the way, at least in big law, we end up allocating resources like we're doing a top-down approach. So, we set the budget for a lot of times for technology without actually knowing what's going to go in it, but we don't necessarily allow for flexibility all the time. And I think sometimes that's a challenge. So for instance,
even worse, like we look at last year, how much profit we make, and then decide how much budget we can spend this year on moving forward. And again, that's putting things backwards. It's like, which business problems do we need to solve? Where are we losing currently money? If we are, for instance, we have one firm that turns out they and we get to that later, like they had more than 10% of write-downs. If you have more than 10% of write-downs and that's costing the firm literally 10% of their revenues, then you should spend probably 1% of your revenue on fixing that problem rather sooner than later. Like, yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly right. I think that's a perfect way to explain it. So let's talk about learning fast to succeed sooner, because we can't fail fast in legal. That's not even on the menu of options, right? So can we talk a little bit about what that looks like?
Yes, and one of the things is that we've seen with AI projects, especially, and certainly for the firms that have started with like an innovation committee, they can't fail. They have got to succeed. And that's also how, like the law firm culture, like you have to succeed. So there's no room for failure. But that means that for your generative AI projects, like you've got to be very realistic because you have a limited budget and you need to address head on like what all is not there. So what we don't see, like we're humans, so we're all procrastinators to more or lesser extent. But a general truth is if we don't know how to do something, we procrastinate. And so what you see happening in many AI projects, why do they start with the things they already know? But that's not projects. Innovation projects never fail because of the things that people know. Projects fail because of the things that they don't know. So you need to, at the start, if anything, sit around and discuss the things that will be challenging and that you presumably don't know yet, so you can address those head on. Because that way you learn much faster if something will fail or will work or won't work. And so that then you can pivot. And that, I don't know if you were going to discuss that right here.
Go for it. We can't possibly screw this up. We can talk about whatever you want.
Well, I wanted to touch a bit on how difficult it is for lawyers. And I don't know if it was in this section or you moved that around, because lawyers are trained to give advice. And more so, like lawyers cannot be wrong. Same holds, by the way, for the engineers and physicians. Like you cannot make mistakes, that lives are sometimes at stake, often at stake. That means that their whole training has been geared at knowing and avoiding risks and providing solid advice. So if someone asks you something, you are the expert, so you are giving advice. Well, there are two things that work against you when you start your generative AI project. A, you don't know what you're doing. And accepting that is often very difficult. And there's a high chance of failure, which is also why would you even start it? But if you don't acknowledge both right from the get-go, you set yourself up for failure. Because if you pretend that you know what you're doing, and if you're then starting to project like you would do for a client, whenever someone asks you something, start to defend your whatever you do, and state with certainty that what you're doing, no one can help you, and you're just digging a hole deeper for yourself. Well, and that's again why it's so important to focus on the problem. You can be honest about the problem, and you can also be honest that you don't know what the solution is yet, but then others can help you to better understand the problem and helping you understand the successes. So anyways, I'm mixing up a lot of stuff here, and I know you have a really neat slide deck, so some of this will come back later on.
We'll dig into it. We're going to get to it all. Exactly. Okay, cool. So let's talk a little bit about the idea of point solution versus big, bold initiatives, and kind of why we prefer point solutions and why they're more successful.
Well, that's in law firms to get heard, and again, that ties to the culture in a lot of law firms. To get the attention of the COO or the managing partner, you need to come with a big, bold initiative. You need to bring in the elephant. That's when people listen. That's just how people are geared. Again, what we saw, that example that I gave previously, these big, bold ideas often are so vaguely described and encompass so much things that it's very difficult to identify where will you start. So I have no problem with addressing big, bold ideas, but we need to start somewhere. And so how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. So so it's much easier to start then with that point solution, that one bite at a time, and get that done for a host of reasons, because then you make progress. So that's the huge difference between like the before and after that I sketched in that case study. Is if you focus on something specific, we can make headway. We can create solutions. We can do stuff. We can research it, and we can make progress. And we can also find early on that maybe we have taken a wrong path. But by doing it, we get the data to then find that, hey, this is a dead end. We need to change around and turn back. If you do that for something small, no big deal. If you do it for something really big, it becomes a really big issue.
Yeah.
So smaller things, you just can move things quicker. Yeah.
Well, and I think about this as a PMP, a project manager. When I was looking at your material, I thought, well, you know what, this kind of makes me think of like agile versus waterfall project management too, right? Like in agile, you can realize things have gone wrong quicker and fix it, or change course, or not spend all the money before you realize, things have gone off track. Whereas when you get on a big, bold initiative, sometimes it's great until it's not great.
Well, and also realize, like the previous committee, like I was pleased that of the 7 people, like 2 or 3 had lost interest, and we were working with 3 or 4, because early phase innovation project teams, 3 or 4, perfect. 1 is too small. Anything between 2 and 5 helps you to keep a project moving. If you are beyond 5, it's a lot of talk, and it does not make the project faster, at least not in the initial phases. So that's also why, like with a small team, you can just tackle and make progress. And if you just have like 10, 15 people at the table, you're just often spending so much time getting everyone aligned that you just don't get anywhere.
Yeah, I've read some research. It's 7 or less if you want to make a decision. No more than 7. Anyone who's worked with me knows that I will not invite more than 7 people to a meeting ever. And I think too, as you're listening, and if you're taking notes or anything, I always think about slides like this as stuff that I can ammunition to convince someone higher up if they're trying to say like, no, we need the big bold thing. Great, we stack a whole bunch of point things to make the big bold thing, right? So I use slides like this to convince people that there's a better
Start small.
Start small, right? Exactly.
It may not always sound sexy, but start small. Absolutely.
Start small, right? Exactly. Cool. So let's talk about identifying a clear, well-defined business need, which sounds simple, but we all know if we were that simple, we'd be crushing it nonstop, right? So let's talk
Absolutely.
about a solution in search of a problem.
Well, that's why we got started at Iltacon
Right,
because for
exactly.
me, one of the things I mentioned to Cheryl was that like these AI conversations drive me nuts, but for a different reason than most people think. I love AI. I love technology, but we're talking here about a solution. So how can we talk about the problem that this solution is going to solve instead of talking about the solution without knowing what the problem is? Hence the title of this series. Because I have seen that if you push a technology into an organization, it's an uphill battle. Well, if you the other way around, generative and most AI solutions are efficiency and effectiveness solutions. So if you can find an inefficiency, then it becomes a pool. And I've like to be just very concrete, like what is the difference? So if you push a technology, it will be like, do you want to try a generative AI solution to speed up our due diligence process? Please,
Right, right.
please. And that's where you get into those adoption challenges because people think like, well, maybe you need to be really motivated.
Yeah, yeah, right,
Well, alternatively, if you say, like, we are losing money on fixed fee due diligence lists, not we, your practice group.
right.
Do you want to help find a way to lower the cost of these due diligences? And again, like, there's no solution in there. Perhaps the solution is not generative AI. I have had generative AI projects starting out as generative AI and ending up with reshuffling some of the paralegals because that solved 60% of the problems. So, um, but that's where you get people behind. If you want to know more about that, that's Simon Sinek, The Circle of Why, because the business pool is the why. So start with the why.
I love that. And it's, this applies to so much. And I think we get this so wrong in legal. We're constantly like, take that. You want this, you do. And it's like if we just look for the pool, they'd be begging us, right? That's the idea.
Yeah, at the same time, it's more difficult than you think because I spent quite some time with our teams to define the business pool. Very few firms have their financial data at a matter level in order. So for them to know which matters are losing money, that's just not how their bookkeeping systems work. So even in the generative AI space, we have had to help teams to really dig deep in define like there was a sense that the firm lost money, but it was unclear where the money got lost. More sometimes it was also because it was lost in areas that officially would be impossible because according to the rules, everyone writes every minute. But that's in theory, of like in practice, definitely that's the theory. In practice, that's definitely not what happens. So to get to those numbers can be a challenge, and that should be part of the project as well. And that's often what we help firms with. So it's easy to say the business pool, but getting those, especially the financial numbers, above the table can take some time.
Definitely. I've definitely seen that. So let's talk about places to look. Like, where do we check the couch cushions? How do we find what kind of places do we look for the right project?
Well, what you want to have a big and pressing pain point. And so this is a chart that AM Law came up with, Thomson Reuters, great data. And they showed, amongst others, that most law firms already write off about 3 to 7% of their billable hours. And then clients write off another 2%. So there are reasons why these write-offs occur. Numerous reasons, some valid, some invalid. But that's a great starting point because that's directly tied to revenue. So we're talking often for law firms. If the law firm makes 10 million, 10%, that's a $1 million problem. So that's often where it's easy to, where you can easily jolt people around. At the same time, you will need more specificity because, as I said, like there's a lot in that bucket. So you need to then spend some time to really uncover. But that generally that's fertile ground because why are law firms writing things off? It's because clients just don't value the work, which means that this is low value work which is prime for automation and for AI.
Yeah, and I think too, when I think about, I think two things you hit on there. One was, kind of digging in, right? So yes, okay, you're writing off whatever 7 to 10%. You want to figure out which practice group that's in. Is one hit more than others, right? You don't want to look just totally across the firm. Are there areas that are getting hit harder, right? So getting into that clear business need, where is that? It's very, very, you want to pinpoint and you want to get into that specific area so you can find who's hurting, right? Who's in pain.
And again, like that's easier said than done, depending on the culture of the firm.
Yes, very, very much so. And I think too, whenever I was looking for a problem in firms, we can go in and say, well, tell me about, show me your utilization, show me but like you said, the data is not always great. So a lot of times I'll say, what reports do you get? Like, what do you get every week? Let me see those, because at least it's something we know we're tracking, right? And then it exists already. It's not new math I have to do. It's something you see. It's something firm leadership sees. And then the other thing I like to just mention is, I think it's important to realize that just because you think it's a pain point, it's important that the person who in theory experiences it thinks it's a pain point, right? Or experiences the pain. So just because you think losing 7% is important, for some other reason, maybe firm management doesn't think that's a big deal or whatever.
Absolutely. No, if firm management does not think it's a deal, then stop your project, please.
Don't do it. Don't
do it.
You don't have the motivated people, and it's not going to be a success. That's the key.
Yeah. That being said, like for associates are usually great sources for ideas because they are living it in a daily matter. But for them, it's a challenge to get heard. So there's also an art to hearing what is being said, and
and giving it weight, right? Figuring out how much to weight it.
I think we have a slide on that that comes next. I think there are better ways.
Get to know the problem is next, kind of once we identify it.
So I think we I can't beat this beat.
But it is. You have to work with the stakeholders. It's not just you, right? You have to work with the people experiencing the problem.
Absolutely, and translate it in such a way that others can understand the problem as well. As I mentioned, like the problem won't change. If whether this project is not be successful, the project won't change. If the problem won't change, so at least you have contributed in knowing what not to do. So even if this project is going nowhere, you have enriched the firm in an understanding that this is not how we're going to solve the problem, but that problem will persist if you pick out a rock solid problem.
That's a good way to describe it. Okay. So I think one of the last points, but it's a super important point, is one project at a time.
Yes.
But go ahead.
Yeah, and that ties into one of your other sessions, like resources, but it also ties in like in a law firm, you rely on the people that are motivated to do these projects. So an AI project is driven by those in the firm who think AI is super duper important and I want to do something with it. And driven by the people who currently have a problem that they think that can be solved with automation. Typically, they're the same people. We'll get to that in a sec. So, but if you ask these people to engage in 3 projects, none will get on, or even 2 projects. So if you work, everyone has a limited amount of time in the day. Innovation projects take work. I cannot make that I can make it more fun. I can make it slightly less work, but still there's a lot of work that needs to be done. So if you divide that attention over 2 projects, it means that both projects take twice as long, but there's many studies about switching. It will take 3 times as long. So you won't have anything to show for a long time. Well, if you first do one project, be successful, then do the next one, you move much faster, learn much faster, and have quicker results to show for and can earlier reap the benefits.
Exactly. All right. And then let's talk about project communication. This is like something that's very near and dear to my heart. And when we started talking about this, I was like, oh, this is real. I thought this was something I made up.
Well, it ties back to what I previously said. So innovation projects are really hard in law firms because innovation projects are not necessarily set out to be successful. There's a lot of uncertainty and a lot of unknowns. Well, attorneys are trained to be certain. So you cannot say to your managing partner, well, I'm engaging in this project. We may or may not be successful and we are exploring this. They will think like, that's not worth my time because they are known to like, I'm working on this matter. This is what we're doing for the client and this is how we're going to be successful. That's the language they know and speak. So when you work on an innovation project, you need to be very careful that all the uncertainty stays inside your bubble, so to speak. So in your team, you need to be dead honest about all the things that you don't know. Getting back to a point I made earlier, the sooner you are honest about the things you don't know, you can start to figure those out. That means that inside your project, you need to have a circle of trust and you have deadlines that you won't make. You have additional work, you will pivot, you will change. To the outside of the world, you need to project this realm of calm. And that's where some of the work we do and the platform we help are really helpful with, because then you can state like, if people ask, so how is the project going? What are your first findings? You can just focus on, oh, we are working on the project description. It takes 2 weeks. In 2 weeks' time, we'll have that. Then we work on the business case without having to say anything about all the uncertainties. And you can also say we are working on this problem. That won't change either. So that way while there is all this uncertainty, you can still project to the outside world this stability of, and not pretend, but that you kind of project that you know what you're doing and can move the ball forward without having to acknowledge all the uncertainties that are going on.
Right. It's not a misrepresentation, but it's a quiet kind of calm. It's, we got this, we're working on it, we have a plan, and we're executing it as planned. And that's really what it's about. But inside that circle, we have to be open, we have to be honest, we have to be transparent. And that's why trust is so important on your project team. Excellent. All right. So how about, what if we have too many, we have like a whole bunch of really awesome, great problems to solve. How do we decide how to pick that one to start with?
Yeah, and this is a pet peeve of mine. So if you read all the innovation literature, like, and hey, that's where I started too. Like, typical selection criteria: is this desirable? Is this viable? Is this feasible? Well, I can tell you that if you have a good salesman, they can tell for every project that they are desirable, viable, and feasible. If you have someone that is more of an introvert and a little bit more nerdy and not so good at sales, they will really struggle to kind of sell their project. So there's a lot of bias when you evaluate projects on these criteria. So what I did in many of my studies, I looked at like, what defines success? Is that desirability, viability, and feasibility? And we found that that was not the case at all. One of the key things was commitment from the top. The other one is commitment from the project team. So if you have a driven and motivated team, that's the number one indicator that they will be successful. And this sounds like kind of putting it backwards, but it's something that you can quite easily sense early on. If you have an eager team, that means they're onto something. And Ed Catmull said this beautifully. If you have a brilliant idea and a mediocre team, they will screw it up. If you have a mediocre idea and a brilliant team, they will make it work or come up with something better. And so that's what we are always looking for, is like, what is the passion of the team? Because we are all smart people. And especially everyone that signed up for this session, they're all smart people. They don't want to work on ideas that are not desirable, not viable, and not feasible. So usually when you have a team that's dedicated and that has that momentum, they are onto something. So look for that and look for the momentum. That's a much better indicator of where you should spend your resources than look for projects that have a very high desirability, viability, and feasibility according to whatever metrics you're using in the firm.
Yeah, I have never. I really like this when you shared your research and your findings, because as a project manager and a former head of a PMO, I've rated projects on desirability, viability, and feasibility. And like you said, it's like, all the scores come within like 0.2 of one another. It makes no sense. It's like you have to score things like the Russian judges and not give anybody a 6, you know, to.
Well, and it becomes also very subjective. And if you're not careful, like the ideas that come from managing partners are rated very highly, and ideas that come from juniors are rated very poorly. Well, if you have a project that the managing partner wants to do, and perhaps the managing partner is not a good example, but a partner. A partner wants to do, but he's not willing to put a foot forward, you know that's never going to happen, even if it's a brilliant idea. But if he's not committed to make it happen, it won't happen, and it will just be one big battle, uphill battle. So, and that's a really tough realization, and I think that also that point pinpoints back, like in the strategic model, that's a no-go. If you have said as a firm you're going to do this, you're going to do this. In the opportunistic model, you just look at the resources you have. Where is the energy? Where is where's the passion? And where can you really make things happen?
Yeah. So if you have a practice group and they come to you with a handful of ideas and they're super psyched, that might be the place to start. Or at least start looking. Yeah. All right. So we have one question. I put together a slide that just kind of put a nice little summary of kind of the major points we talked about here. So, you know, opportunistic, looking for those organic opportunities where you have those really engaged people, point solutions over those big crazy things, super well-defined business need, business pool, motivated participants, start with a single project and book an early win, and use success criteria as opposed to kind of those old-fashioned viability rating systems. But would love to jump to questions. So if anybody, I have one question we're going to jump to. Anybody else has any, throw them either in the chat or the Q&A. So here, floor is a question. So kind of going back to the idea, and I think this was talking about when you were talking about your workshop and sharing that case study where they were originally going to vendors and saying, what does your tool do, right? And then it switched to, you know, this is what we want. Does your tool do that, or how does your tool do that? And so the question is, you know, feels like the opposite is really true most of the time in project management, which is the consumer usually doesn't know what they want or need. How do you kind of reconcile that in terms of, you know, when somebody's creating a product, they don't necessarily know, or you know, you go out, you ask the market, what do you need, right? You've asked a lawyer before, what do you need? And they don't necessarily know. So how does someone developing a product think about that? And Lindsay, if I haven't quite hit your question right, please feel free to clean it up for me.
Well, I think this is very different for vendors that are creating solutions, because they need to be a step ahead of the market versus internally in a firm when you're looking for solutions, because that's where, in both cases, it's the business need, but of very different of a different magnitude. Because for a law firm, as I said, like they're solving their problem and the scale is very limited. Well, if you're a vendor, like let's not go there, because that's for a vendor, this kind of approach does not work. So happy to take that conversation offline. So if you stay with the law firm itself, we are very conditioned that vendors come to you and sell to you. And I think that's the wrong approach. That's why you have so many of these adoption challenges, because then it becomes this shiny object phase. And I think also for vendors, it makes it for a much more fruitful conversations if you said like, hey, these are the problems we're having. Can you solve that? Because then it's upfront, it's clear whether there's a fit or no fit.
Yeah, I think that makes a ton of sense.
It's just that neither good vendors, they will work with you. And they will also be honest to say that, like, if that's what you want, we are not the solution. And they may even be able to point you out to other solutions.
Absolutely. So excellent. All right. If there's any other questions, I don't have another one up at the moment. I wanted to throw up just a little info.
Yeah, so this is our de-risk generative chat GPT. So if any in the audience kind of like is struggling to convince their colleagues that AI is a good thing, or define what your project is about, or keep the enthusiasm alive of their innovation or AI committee, or just struggle to know where to start and how to start, this is the program for you, because in 4 months after you've started, you will have a clearly defined project, you will have a business case and a plan for moving forward. So, and I'm also happy to say, like, this program just runs to the business case. We can also help you with the implementation, and we currently have a track record of 80% of our teams delivering concrete outcomes within 6 months after we've started working with them. So if you want to see something happen and be the outlier on that graph that Cheryl showed.
Yes. And if you want to connect with Flora and reach her, there's a QR code here on the screen that connects to her LinkedIn, so you can send her a message directly. And you can always connect with me. I always like more friends online. I'm always happy to connect and chat and tell people, share anything I can share with you.
Yeah, so, and that's the only advantage of a terrible name like Floor Blindenbach. There's only one of me on the planet. So if you find me online, it's me.
Right. I mean, that's the nice thing about me having 900 names myself. It's like, if you find Cheryl Wilson Griffin, it's definitely me. So it's not a problem. Excellent. Well, thanks for everyone who was able to join today. I hope you'll join us for next week's session with Shauna Hoffman. Following this session, we'll have the videos up on our YouTube channel, and we'll follow up on Tuesday with a what I'm calling a sister blog, which will cover some of this, a little bit, some related materials, but we'll kind of bring everything together. So in the meantime, I hope to see you next week. Flora, thank you again. This has been an awesome session, and appreciate everybody's time today. Have a great week, and we'll talk soon.